Forget the pristine marble temples and noble philosophers you see in movies. Picture this instead. You're walking through streets choked with filth, where the air hangs heavy with disease. The water is a gamble, and the social rules are an iron cage. This is the real ancient Greece. We're about to peel back the polished veneer of history to reveal the gritty, inconvenient, and often brutal reality of daily life. Prepare to have your romantic notions shattered, because for all its glory, you likely wouldn't survive a single day. Your typical Athenian home, the oikos, wasn't a grand villa, but a private fortress built around a central courtyard. This open-air space was the heart of the home, providing light and a buffer from the chaotic street. Close to the entrance was the andron, the men's domain. This functional room, with its simple stone benches, was reserved for the master to entertain male guests, conduct business, and hold his famous drinking parties or symposia. It was a space that deliberately excluded the world of women and family. Venture deeper into the oikos, and you would find yourself in a hidden world, the gynaeceum. This was the women's quarters, a segregated space, often on the upper floor or at the back of the house. It was here, away from the public eye, that the lives of women, children, and domestic slaves unfolded. They managed the household, wove textiles, and raised the next generation. This rigid separation was not just architectural, it was a physical manifestation of the Athenian belief that a respectable woman's place was strictly in the private sphere. The air in ancient Athens would have been a constant assault. With no sanitation system, waste was simply tossed into the narrow alleys, creating a breeding ground for deadly bacteria. The city's water, drawn from public wells, was often contaminated, making diseases like typhoid and cholera rampant. Infant mortality was tragically high, with estimates suggesting 1 in 3 children died before the age of 5. Life expectancy was shockingly low. This was the grim reality that existed just steps away from the majestic Parthenon. We celebrate Athens as the birthplace of democracy, but its version was profoundly exclusive. The right to vote and shape the city's destiny was a privilege reserved for a tiny fraction of the population, adult male citizens who had completed military service. This immediately excluded all women, all slaves, and all foreign residence medics, who together made up the vast majority of the city's inhabitants. This famed democracy was, in truth, a small, private club built upon the disenfranchisement of nearly everyone else. The magnificent achievements of Athens, its philosophy, art, and architecture were all underwritten by the brutal institution of slavery. Enslaved people were not considered humans, but property, living tools to be bought, sold, and exploited at will. They performed every kind of labor, from domestic service to the soul-crushing work in the silver mines of Laurion. The wealth that funded the Athenian navy and the construction of the Parthenon was extracted directly from the suffering and shortened lives of this massive, enslaved workforce. To understand how deeply slavery was woven into the Greek mind, look no further than Aristotle. In his work Politics, the brilliant philosopher doesn't just accept slavery, he justifies it as a natural state of being. He argues that some people are slaves by nature, possessing strong bodies, but lacking the reason to guide themselves. Therefore, it is natural for them to be ruled by masters by nature. This chilling rationale from a titan of Western thought shows that slavery wasn't just an economic reality. It was a cornerstone of their worldview. Now let us travel to the damp, misty shores of Roman Britain. In 60 AD, a rebellion erupted, led by a woman whose name would echo through history, Boudica, Queen of the Iceni. The spark was not political, but deeply personal. After her husband's death, the Romans annexed his kingdom, publicly flogged Boudica, and raped her young daughters. This calculated act of humiliation was a fatal error. It transformed a grieving queen into a furious warrior and ignited a rebellion that would set the entire province ablaze with the fire of vengeance. While personal violation lit the fuse, the explosive powder of the Boudiccan revolt had been accumulating for years. The Roman occupation brought predatory lending, and a key figure was the philosopher Seneca. He had lent vast sums to British elites, and then, along with the emperor, suddenly called in the debts. This act of financial warfare plunged the tribes into economic ruin. Combined with heavy taxes and land confiscation, it created an atmosphere of pure desperation. The rebellion was as much a fight for economic survival as it was for freedom. The first target of the rebels' fury was Camulodunum Colchester, a colony of Roman veterans and a potent symbol of their oppression. The city was built on confiscated land, and its inhabitants treated the local Britons with contempt. Boudicca's enraged army descended upon the unprepared settlement, burning it to the ground and slaughtering its people. A Roman legion sent to help was ambushed and annihilated. Archaeologists today can still identify the Boudiccan layer, a thick stratum of black ash and debris that serves as a silent testament to the city's violent end. After destroying Colchester, Boudicca's warband, now swollen with recruits from other tribes, marched on Londinium London, and Verulamium sent Albans. The Roman historian Tacitus records a wave of merciless violence. He wrote that the rebels were not interested in taking prisoners, but in slaughter by fire and sword. According to his account, some 70,000 Romans and their allies were killed across the three settlements. While the number might be exaggerated, the archaeological evidence of widespread, fiery destruction confirms the terrifying ferocity of the uprising. The Roman governor, Suetonius Paulinus, was campaigning in Wales when news of the revolt reached him. Racing back, he realized he was too outnumbered to save London. He made a ruthless but brilliant military decision. He would sacrifice the cities to save the province. He abandoned London and Verulamium to their fates, allowing the rebel army to exhaust its fury, while he consolidated his legions for a single, decisive battle. It was a cold, pragmatic choice that prioritized the integrity of the empire over the lives of thousands of its subjects. Suetonius chose his ground carefully, a narrow gorge with a forest at his back, preventing the Britons from using their superior numbers to surround him. As Boudicca's chaotic host charged forward, the Roman legionaries stood like a wall of iron. They unleashed a devastating volley of javelins before drawing their short swords and advancing in a disciplined, wedge-shaped formation. The superior training, armor, and tactics of the Romans proved unstoppable. The rebellion was crushed in a single, bloody battle, and Roman control was savagely reasserted. After her defeat, Boudicca was largely forgotten for centuries. It was not until the Victorian era that she was rediscovered and completely reinvented. The Victorians, at the height of their own global empire, transformed the anti-imperial rebel into a British national hero, a noble warrior queen fighting for liberty. The irony is immense. The leaders of a vast colonizing power celebrated a woman whose entire legacy was her violent resistance to foreign conquest. The famous statue of her in London is a monument to this remarkable historical contradiction. In ancient Egypt, medicine was an intricate blend of practical observation and magical belief, perfectly captured in the Ebers Papyrus from around 1550 BC. This massive scroll contains over 700 formulas and incantations for everything from crocodile bites to psychiatric disorders. While many remedies rely on spells to expel disease-causing demons. The text also reveals surprisingly advanced knowledge, including a detailed description of the circulatory system, with the heart at its center, showcasing an early grasp of anatomy. In ancient India, the surgeon Sushruta was developing techniques that were centuries ahead of their time. His work, the Sushruta Samhita, is a foundational text of Ayurvedic medicine and a marvel of surgical knowledge. He meticulously described complex procedures for treating fractures and removing bladder stones, and he is often called the father of surgery. His most famous contribution was in plastic surgery, a detailed method for reconstructing a nose using a flap of skin from the forehead, a technique so effective that its principles are still used today. In ancient China, a holistic system of medicine emerged based on a philosophy of balance. Traditional Chinese medicine views the body as an ecosystem, where health depends on the smooth flow of vital energy. Or Qi, a key diagnostic tool, is intricate pulse diagnosis. A skilled physician feels the pulse at multiple positions on each wrist, with each point corresponding to a different organ system. By assessing the pulse's quality, they can detect subtle energy imbalances and prescribe a personalized treatment of herbs and acupuncture to restore harmony. For over 2,000 years, Western medicine was dominated by the Greco-Roman theory of the four humors. This doctrine held that the body was composed of four fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health was a state of perfect balance among these humors, while illness was caused by an excess or deficiency of one of them. The theory also extended to personality, giving us the four temperaments: the sanguine cheerful, the phlegmatic calm, the choleric fiery, and the melancholic sad, each linked to an excess of a particular humor. On the island of Lesbos in the 6th century BC lived a poet so revered that Plato himself reportedly called her the 10th muse. This was Sappho, a master of lyric poetry, whose verses explored the intense and intimate landscape of love and desire with unparalleled skill. Her work, once filling 9 volumes in the Library of Alexandria, was celebrated for its emotional honesty. Tragically, nearly all of it has been lost to time and censorship. Today, only one complete poem and a collection of precious fragments survive as whispers of her genius, though only scraps of her work remain. Sappho's poetic power is undeniable. Her most famous piece, Fragment 31, is a masterful depiction of the physical torment of jealousy. The speaker watches the woman she loves with a man and is overcome. Her heart pounds, her voice fails, and a thin flame runs beneath her skin. It is a brilliant, timeless portrait of desire. These surviving fragments, though few, are a testament to an artist of profound emotional depth and intimacy, securing her legacy as one of the greatest poets of all time. The true voice of Sappho was deliberately silenced for centuries. The raw, unapologetic passion of her verses, particularly her celebration of love between women, proved too scandalous for the patriarchal societies that followed. Scribes and scholars engaged in a long campaign of erasure, either allowing her work to crumble into dust or twisting her words into chaste lessons for schoolgirls. But this attempt to mute a female genius ultimately failed. In the modern era, Sappho was rediscovered and triumphantly reclaimed as a powerful icon for feminist and LGBTQ+ movements. Her fragmented poetry, a testament to the resilience of a voice that refused to be silenced. In the Andes Mountains of ancient Peru, a medical practice, both terrifying and astonishingly advanced, took place. Trepanation. This was no crude ritual, but a sophisticated surgical procedure, drilling into the skull of a living person to treat head injuries. What is truly mind-boggling is how successful they were. Archaeological evidence reveals that a huge percentage of patients survived, their skulls showing smooth, healed bone. Their success rates were remarkably higher than those for the same procedure during the American Civil War, thousands of years later, revealing a profound and unexpected knowledge of anatomy and surgical care. For most people in the ancient world, life was a grinding battle against dental pain. The coarse, gritty diet relentlessly wore down tooth enamel, and with extraction being the only remedy for an abscess, chronic infection was a fact of life. Only the wealthy Etruscans, with their masterfully crafted gold and ivory dental bridges, found any relief. For everyone else, from the farmers of Egypt to the philosophers of Greece, life was a slow march toward a toothless old age, a constant, nagging reminder of the body's fragility and the pervasiveness of pain. Imagine a world where time was not a rigid, ticking taskmaster, but a fluid, organic rhythm. In antiquity, the day was measured by the sun's slow arc across the sky. The Romans divided daylight into 12 hours, but this meant that a long summer hour was drastically different from a brief winter one. This natural conception of time shaped all of daily life. Schedules were flexible, and life moved at a more deliberate, human pace, governed not by the artificial logic of a clock, but by the grand, unhurried cycles of the sun and the seasons. When the sun set in the ancient world, a profound and menacing darkness descended. A flickering oil lamp offered only a tiny, fragile pocket of light against an overwhelming blackness. For the vast majority, night brought an end to all activity and a heightened sense of vulnerability. Unlit city streets became treacherous, breeding fear and a powerful belief in the supernatural. This was more than physical darkness. It was a psychological state, a time when the veil between the human and spirit worlds felt thin, and the night was ruled by stories of ghosts and demons. Step out of the ceaseless cacophony of modern life and into the profound quiet of antiquity. In a world without engines or electronics, the dominant sounds were the clip-clop of sandals on stone or the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. This relative silence would have dramatically shaped the human experience. It fostered a deep appreciation for the subtle sounds of nature and made the human voice a powerful, intimate instrument for storytelling and song. But this quiet also meant isolation, with news traveling only as fast as a horse could run, making the world feel vast and disconnected. Our modern world is saturated with vibrant color, but the ancient world was a far more muted, earth-toned place. Dyes were difficult and expensive to produce from plants and minerals, making brightly colored clothing a powerful status symbol. The legendary Tyrian purple, extracted drop by drop from thousands of sea snails, was worth more than gold and reserved for emperors. For the average person, clothing consisted of the drab, undyed beiges and browns of wool and linen. This made the brilliant colors of nature, a flower, a sunset, a gemstone, all the more dazzling and precious. We live in a world of almost unimaginable material abundance, but the ancient world was one of stark simplicity. For most people, possessions were few and essential. A few clay pots, a wooden chest, a handful of tools. The modern concept of disposability would have been utterly alien. Every object was precious, repaired and reused until it physically fell apart. This scarcity fostered a different relationship with the material world. A simple pot or a well-worn tunic was not a commodity, but a cherished possession, imbued with a sense of personal history and vital necessity. The modern supermarket shields us from a fundamental terror of the ancient world, the constant, looming threat of starvation. The ancient diet was monotonous and highly seasonal, and a lack of refrigeration meant a single failed harvest could spell disaster. A drought, a flood, or a pestilence could plunge an entire community into famine. This precarious relationship with food shaped every aspect of ancient life, influencing religion, driving politics, and dictating the daily routines of a population that lived in a state of perpetual food insecurity. We are insulated from the world by a sophisticated infrastructure of comfort. The ancient world offered no such buffer. Life for most was a state of constant physical discomfort. Homes were drafty and cold in winter, hot and stuffy in summer. Clothing was coarse and furniture was rudimentary. The lack of sanitation meant being constantly exposed to filth and stench. This environment of relentless hardship fostered a stoic resilience, but it also made life a brutal and unforgiving affair, a daily struggle against the elements and the frailties of the human body. In the ancient world, the modern ideal of shaping one's own destiny was largely meaningless. Life was governed by a rigid social hierarchy that was nearly impossible to escape. Your profession, your legal rights, and your marriage prospects were almost entirely determined by the family into which you were born. A farmer's son became a farmer. A senator's daughter married for alliance. This structure provided a powerful sense of community and place, but it also functioned as an iron cage, a source of deep frustration that trapped countless individuals in a life not of their own choosing. While we strive for equal justice, the ancient world operated a tiered system where your wealth and family name mattered more than facts. The law was often unwritten and subject to the whims of a powerful magistrate. A nobleman could escape punishment for a crime that would see a commoner flogged, exiled, or crucified. This unequal application of the law fostered deep cynicism, but it also reinforced the importance of community solidarity. For the powerless, the only true protection was not the law, but the unwavering loyalty of one's family and neighbors. Our world is defined by relentless innovation. The ancient world, in contrast, was one of deep-seated conservatism. The ways of the ancestors were not seen as outdated, but as a sacred guide for living. Innovation was often viewed with suspicion, and social and political institutions were remarkably stable, changing only glacially over centuries. This reverence for tradition provided a powerful sense of cultural continuity and social cohesion, but it could also be a source of stagnation and intolerance, a system that actively resisted new ideas and punished dissent. In a world of crowded homes, where multiple generations lived under one roof, privacy was a nearly non-existent luxury. The streets were bustling, and public life was the center of everything. This lack of personal space fostered a powerful sense of community, an inescapable awareness that one was part of a larger social organism. But it also must have been a source of constant stress, a system where it was impossible to escape the prying eyes, unsolicited opinions, and constant judgment of one's neighbors, making every personal matter a public affair. The ancient world was a profoundly violent and insecure place. War was not an aberration, but a constant, ever-present threat that could shatter lives and destroy communities in an instant. Within cities, crime was rampant, and personal safety often depended on the strength of your own arm or the protection of a powerful patron. This pervasive violence shaped the human psyche, fostering a deep-seated fatalism about the fragility of life. But it also cultivated immense courage and a fierce resilience, a determination to survive in a dangerous and unforgiving world. We can cross continents in hours, but for most ancient people, the world was only as large as the distance they could walk in a few days. Travel was a slow, difficult, and perilous undertaking, fraught with dangers from bandits, pirates, and disease. The vast majority of people were born, lived, and died within a few miles of their village. This limited mobility fostered a powerful sense of local identity and a deep connection to one's home. But it also bred a profound ignorance of the wider world, creating fertile ground for prejudice and suspicion of outsiders. In our information age, we forget that knowledge in the ancient world was a rare and precious commodity, a flame jealously guarded by a small elite of scribes and scholars. Most people were illiterate, their understanding of the world shaped by oral tradition, folklore, and superstition. This limited access to information fostered a sense of wonder and mystery, a recognition that the world was vast and complex. But it also created a society vulnerable to manipulation, where the unlettered masses could be easily swayed by those who controlled the written word. In the ancient world, religion was not a private affair, but an all-encompassing force woven into the fabric of reality. The gods were not distant concepts, but powerful, capricious beings who actively intervened in human affairs. A thunderstorm or a plague was a direct sign of divine displeasure. This worldview provided a framework for meaning in a chaotic universe, but it was also a source of constant anxiety. It required endless rituals and sacrifices to appease a pantheon of powerful, unpredictable, and easily offended deities who held the fate of mortals in their hands. The greatest chasm between our world and the ancient one is not technology, but a fundamental difference in consciousness. The ancients inhabited a world that was smaller, slower, and more dangerous, but also more intimate and suffused with a sense of mystery. To travel back in time would be more than a change of scenery. It would be to step into a different state of being. It would be to see the universe through eyes that held a different understanding of life, death, and the divine, a worldview profoundly different from our own. As we enjoy our modern comforts, it is worth reflecting on what might have been lost along the way. In gaining control over our environment, we may have lost our intimate connection to the natural world. In building a global society, we may have weakened the bonds of our local communities. And in explaining the universe with science, we may have lost our sense of wonder and our tolerance for the deep, abiding mysteries of the human heart. The story of the ancient world is a quiet reminder of the things we may have forgotten in our rush to progress. To enlist as a Roman legionary was to strike a formidable bargain. The promise was security, a steady wage, a plot of land upon retirement, and the ultimate prize of Roman citizenship. But this was paid for with 2 decades of crushing discipline and relentless labor. A legionary was not just a soldier. He was the empire's iron multi-tool. His days were a grueling cycle of 20-mile marches under a crushing load, followed by the back-breaking work of building the forts and roads that held the empire together. His individuality forged into a single, loyal cog in the machine of Rome. The Roman road was the empire's circulatory system, pumping life and power to its farthest extremities. These were not mere paths, but arteries of stone, engineered with military precision to last for centuries. They cut through mountains and bridged rivers, a testament to the Roman genius for imposing order on nature. Along these paved highways flowed more than just legions. They carried merchants, administrators, and ideas. They were the threads that wove the sprawling territories into a single, cohesive tapestry, the physical embodiment of the Roman peace. The Library of Alexandria was not just a collection of scrolls. It was the vibrant, beating heart of the Hellenistic intellectual world. For centuries, it acted as a magnet, drawing the greatest minds of the age to study, debate, and create. It was here that the circumference of the earth was first calculated, and the foundational texts of Greek literature were preserved. Its end was not a single, dramatic fire, but a slow, agonizing decline from political instability and neglect, a tragic loss of a universe of human knowledge that left a silent crater in history. The gladiator was the ultimate Roman paradox, a slave who could achieve the fame of a god. Legally, he was an outcast without rights, often a condemned criminal whose life was forfeit. Yet in the arena, he became a superstar whose image adorned household mosaics. The gladiatorial schools were a grim fusion of a military academy and a death row prison, where men were forged into killing machines. To be a gladiator was to live on the knife's edge between public adoration and violent death, a disposable commodity who was also a priceless, celebrated investment. The magnificent aqueducts that snaked across the Roman landscape were far more than just sophisticated plumbing. They were bold, public declarations of Roman power and engineering supremacy, bringing millions of gallons of fresh water into the city each day. They were the lifeblood that allowed Rome to grow into a thriving metropolis of over 1 million people. Their constant flow flushed the city's waste, supplied the grand public baths, and drastically reduced waterborne disease, making the scale and complexity of Roman urban life possible. To be born a male child in Sparta was to be born the property of the state. At age 7, boys were torn from their families and plunged into the agoge, a brutal training regime designed to forge the perfect warrior. It was a crucible of pain, meant to strip away all individuality and fear. Boys were kept perpetually hungry to encourage cunning, forced to walk barefoot to toughen their feet, and subjected to ritual floggings to cultivate an absolute tolerance for pain. It was a system that produced the finest soldiers in Greece by deliberately crushing the human spirit. The Vestal Virgins occupied a unique and precarious position in Roman society. They were women of immense power, yet they lived under the shadow of a terrifying sacred duty. Chosen in childhood, their sole task was to tend the eternal flame of Vesta, which symbolized the life of Rome itself. They were granted honors unthinkable for other women, including the right to own property. But their vow of chastity was absolute. If a Vestal broke it, the punishment was swift and horrific. She would be buried alive to purify the city of her transgression. History has too often remembered Cleopatra through the eyes of her enemies. The image of the seductive femme fatale who ensnared powerful Romans is a masterful piece of propaganda, crafted to justify war against her. The reality is that of a brilliant and formidable ruler. Cleopatra was a true intellectual, fluent in multiple languages, and well-versed in philosophy and astronomy. She was a shrewd political operator who skillfully navigated Roman civil war, always with the goal of preserving Egypt's independence. She was a capable ruler, beloved by her own people. The Oracle of Delphi held the ancient world in its thrall, its pronouncements capable of launching wars. But its power did not derive from supernatural prophecy. It came from a masterful understanding of psychology and politics. The priestess delivered her prophecies in cryptic, ambiguous verses. This forced the seeker to project their own hopes and fears onto the message, placing the burden of interpretation on their own shoulders. The temple was also an ancient intelligence hub, its priests well-informed about political currents. It was a masterclass in influence. Roman law is one of the empire's most enduring gifts to Western civilization, a sophisticated system that laid the groundwork for many modern legal principles. Yet, to celebrate it as a system of justice for all is to ignore its brutal inequalities. Roman law was a rigid, tiered system where your rights and punishments were directly tied to your social status. A wealthy patrician could expect leniency for a crime that would earn a commoner a brutal flogging or crucifixion. It was a powerful instrument for maintaining order, built on a foundation of class privilege. In 430 BC, at the zenith of its power, Athens was struck by a devastating plague. Thucydides A survivor left a harrowing account of the pandemic's effects. The disease swept through the overcrowded city, killing an estimated one-third of the population. The psychological impact was catastrophic. Law and order dissolved, religious faith crumbled, and a profound despair gripped the city. The plague shattered the Athenians' confidence in their own civilization and contributed directly to their eventual defeat at the hands of Sparta, a biological catastrophe that crippled the city from within. The modern image of the ancient Olympics as a noble festival of peaceful competition is a romantic fiction. The reality was a fiercely professional and often lethally brutal spectacle. The goal was victory at any cost, for which an athlete would be rewarded with fame and fortune. The events themselves were violent. The pancration, a combat sport with almost no rules, often ended in disfigurement or death. The chariot races were a chaotic thunder of hooves and splintering wood, where spectacular crashes were a celebrated part of the entertainment. The Druids, the priestly class of the ancient Celts, are cloaked in mystery, largely due to the hostile propaganda of their Roman conquerors. Julius Caesar painted them as sinister figures who presided over rituals of human sacrifice, a caricature designed to portray the Gauls as savages in need of Roman civilization. In reality, the Druids were the intellectual and spiritual elite of Celtic society, serving as judges, healers, and philosophers. They were the living repositories of sacred traditions and laws, their true wisdom lost to history and buried beneath Roman bias. The Great Pyramids are so vast and precise that it is tempting to attribute them to a power beyond human capability. The truth is far more impressive. They are a testament to the incredible power of human organization and effort. They were not built by slaves, as myth suggests, but by a skilled and well-organized workforce of Egyptian laborers, housed in purpose-built cities, and provided with food and medical care. These workers quarried, transported, and hauled the massive stone blocks into place with staggering precision, a monument to administrative genius. In a world where the lives of Greek and Roman women were severely restricted, ancient Egypt stands out as a remarkable exception. While society was patriarchal, Egyptian women enjoyed a degree of legal and economic autonomy that was unparalleled in the ancient world. They could own property, run businesses, inherit wealth, and even initiate divorce proceedings. Records show female doctors and scribes, and some even ruled as pharaohs. This relative freedom offers a fascinating counterpoint to the more familiar and far more restrictive models of the ancient Mediterranean. The eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD was a cataclysm that, in its destruction, performed an act of perfect preservation. The cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum, entombed under a thick blanket of ash, offer an unparalleled window into Roman daily life. But beyond the preserved villas and stunning mosaics lies a story of profound human tragedy. The plaster casts of the victims, their bodies contorted in their final moments, are a haunting reminder of the human cost. They are not artifacts. They are the ghosts of real people, a vibrant community silenced in a single, terrible day. The Silk Road was not a single road, but a sprawling network of trade routes that connected east and west for over 1,000 years. It was a conduit for commerce, carrying silk, spices, and other luxury goods from China to the Mediterranean. But the Silk Road was much more than a commercial highway. It was a vibrant artery of cultural exchange. Along these trails traveled not just merchants, but missionaries and soldiers, carrying with them new ideas, technologies, and beliefs. But it was also a conduit for disease, with plagues spreading as easily as silks and spices. In the ancient world, to be a barbarian was not to be uncivilized. It was simply to be a non-Greek, or later, a non-Roman. The term itself comes from the Greek barbaros, a mocking imitation of the sound of a foreign language. The concept was a powerful ideological weapon. It created a sharp distinction between us and them, reinforcing a sense of cultural superiority and justifying conquest. The Romans perfected this, depicting other peoples as savage and inferior, framing their conquests not as aggression, but as a noble civilizing mission. The Roman Colosseum was the epicenter of a vast and brutal entertainment industry, a place where the spectacle of death was served up as a daily diversion. The gladiatorial contests, the wild beast hunts, the public executions, these were not random acts of violence, but carefully choreographed performances designed to thrill and to reinforce the power of the state. The Colosseum was a microcosm of Roman society, its rigid seating arrangements reflecting the strict social hierarchy. It was a powerful tool of social control, a grim testament to the Roman genius for bread and circuses. The fall of the Roman Empire was not a single, dramatic event, but a slow and complex unraveling that took place over centuries. There was no single cause, but a perfect storm of internal and external pressures. The empire had become too large to govern, its economy crippled by inflation and excessive taxation. Constant civil wars weakened the central government, while increasing pressure from migrating tribes stretched the military to its breaking point. Climate change and plagues further strained its resources. It was a long, slow process of transformation, not a sudden collapse. An ancient coin was more than just money. It was a pocket-sized billboard for imperial power. Each new silver denarius that entered circulation carried the emperor's official portrait, a constant, tangible reminder of his authority across the vast empire. The reverse side told a story, a defeated captive to announce a military victory, the goddess of abundance to promise prosperity, or a thunderbolt to link the ruler directly with the gods. Every transaction, from a market stall in Gaul to a tavern in Syria, became a micro-broadcast of the emperor's might and divine favor. For many living in the Roman Empire, the official state religion felt impersonal and transactional. In this spiritual void, mystery cults spreading from the East offered a powerful alternative. Cults like those of the Egyptian goddess Isis or the Persian god Mithras promised what the state religion could not: a personal connection with the divine, a sense of belonging in a secret brotherhood, and the hope of salvation and a blessed afterlife. These cults catered to the deep human need for personal meaning, community, and redemption in a vast and often anonymous world. The famous Library of Alexandria was not without its rivals. In the city of Pergamum, a competing dynasty sought to build a library that would surpass Alexandria's glory, sparking an academic Cold War. Agents from both cities scoured the Mediterranean, trying to buy up the best manuscripts and poach the most famous scholars. At one point, to cripple their rival, Egypt embargoed the export of papyrus, the primary writing material of the age. This act of industrial sabotage, however, spurred a crucial innovation. Pergamum perfected the use of treated animal skin parchment as a superior alternative. You could be a wealthy merchant or a master craftsman in ancient Athens, a vital part of the city's economy, yet you were forever an outsider. This was the life of the metic, or foreign resident. You could live your entire life in the city, contribute to its prosperity, and even fight in its army, but you could never vote or own land. You were a permanent resident alien, living under the city's protection, but deliberately excluded from its political heart. It was a constant reminder that in Athens, blood and birthright trumped all other contributions to society. When legal justice failed in the ancient world, ordinary people often turned to a darker form of recourse. A person cheated in a business deal or spurned in love might furtively scratch a curse onto a thin sheet of lead. They would carve their enemy's name and a specific plea to the gods of the underworld that a rival's tongue be tied in court, or that a charioteer's hands grow clumsy. The lead tablet would then be pierced with a nail to bind the spell and deposited in a well or a fresh grave, a testament to a world where dark magic was a very real tool for settling life scores. The public baths were the quintessential daily ritual for a Roman citizen, and far more than just a place to get clean. They were sprawling architectural marvels and the true social hubs of the city. Here, men from all classes could meet, exercise, network, and gossip. Business deals were struck in the warm rooms, political arguments were had in the courtyards, and poets recited their latest works to a captive audience. The baths were a gymnasium, a spa, and a community center, all rolled into one. The place where the true pulse of Roman society could be felt. A Roman merchant ship leaving a Red Sea port for the East was venturing into a world of immense risk and even greater reward. Harnessing the recently mastered monsoon winds, these ships would make the perilous crossing to India, facing treacherous reefs, sudden storms, and the constant threat of pirates. They traded Roman wine, oil, and pottery for the exotic luxuries the capital craved: fragrant spices, fine silks, and precious gems. This dangerous maritime network linked two disparate worlds, all driven by a shared hunger for commerce and the immense profits to be made. For the inhabitants of a fortified city, the sight of a Roman army on the horizon was the beginning of a nightmare. Siege warfare was a methodical and terrifying science. First came the encirclement, a wall built around the city to cut off all hope. Then, the great war machines would be constructed, massive siege towers taller than the city walls, huge catapults unleashing a constant bombardment of stone and fire, and battering rams pounding relentlessly at the gates. The Romans were masters of this brutal art, combining engineering genius with psychological terror to systematically crush a city's will to resist. Once a year, the citizens of Athens gathered for a unique political ritual born of their deepest fear: tyranny. This was the vote of ostracism. With no charges or trials, any citizen could scratch onto a pottery shard an ostracon, the name of the man he considered the greatest threat to the democracy. If one name appeared on more than 6,000 shards, that individual was immediately exiled for 10 years. It was not a punishment for a crime, but a preemptive strike, a ruthless political weapon that could be used to neutralize a leader who had grown too powerful or popular. For a young person in ancient Greece, listening to a bard recite the Iliad was not mere entertainment. It was their education. The great epic poems were the foundational pillars of their culture, the encyclopedias of the preliterate world. Within their verses, a listener learned about the nature of the gods, the meaning of honor and courage, the history of their great wars, and their own place in the cosmos. These stories were the very fabric of their identity, a shared cultural blueprint that transmitted a society's most important values from one generation to the next. The Roman triumph was the ultimate public spectacle, a piece of political theater designed to elevate a victorious general to near-divine status. The procession snaked through Rome, first with wagons of captured spoils, then with enemy leaders paraded in chains. Finally came the general himself in a 4-horse chariot, his face painted red to emulate the statue of Jupiter. The entire ritual was carefully crafted to awe the populace, celebrate military success, and cement the general's immense prestige and power, a visceral display of Roman dominance. The modern concept of a long, protected childhood would have been alien in the ancient world. For most, childhood was a brief and perilous prelude to the harsh realities of adult life. The first hurdle was simply survival, with devastatingly high infant mortality rates. For those who survived, play was a short-lived luxury, soon replaced by the necessity of contributing to the family's labor in the fields or the workshop. Children were viewed as miniature adults, and the transition to adult responsibilities, including early marriage for girls, was rapid and unforgiving. Imagine the terror of mental illness in a world with no concept of psychology. A person suffering from what we might now diagnose as schizophrenia or severe depression was seen as being afflicted by a supernatural force. Their condition was interpreted as a divine curse or demonic possession. Consequently, treatments were not medical but spiritual. Rituals of purification, loud incantations, or even exorcisms. In more severe cases, the only solution was physical restraint. It was a world where the torments of the mind were made infinitely worse by a complete lack of understanding. While the gladiator is famous, the true sporting obsession of the Roman world was the chariot race. The Circus Maximus in Rome could hold over 150,000 spectators, all ferociously devoted to one of the four color-coded factions: the reds, whites, blues, or greens. The star charioteers were the highest-paid athletes in history. The race itself was a brutal, high-stakes affair, with drivers jostling for position and attempting to force their rivals to crash in a tangled wreck of horses and splintered wood. This, more than any other event, was the roaring heart of Roman mass entertainment. In the cutthroat world of the Roman aristocracy, adoption was rarely an act of compassion. It was a cold, calculated political strategy. A wealthy senator with no male heir would legally adopt a promising young man from another noble family. This was not about creating a new family. It was about forging a powerful alliance and securing a hand-picked successor. The adopted son would gain an immense inheritance and a fast track to power, while the adoptive father ensured that his family name, fortune, and political legacy would continue for another generation. While Roman public religion involved grand temples and state ceremonies, the true spiritual heart of Roman life was found within the home. Every day, the head of the household would lead his family in rituals honoring their household gods, the lares and penates, who protected the family and ensured there was food in the larder. Their small shrine, the lararium, was the focal point of domestic life. Offerings of food and wine were made daily, and no important family event would take place without first consulting these intimate, divine guardians of the home. The very land upon which ancient civilizations were built shaped their destiny. Egypt was the gift of the Nile, its predictable floods fostering a unified, centralized kingdom ruled by a divine pharaoh who controlled the water. In contrast, Greece, a land of rugged mountains and a fractured coastline, naturally divided people. This terrain made overland travel difficult and led to the development of hundreds of fiercely independent, competing city-states. The physical geography of these two regions predetermined their entire political and social structures. For a farmer in a Roman province, the arrival of the tax collector was a moment of dread. The state outsourced tax collection to the highest bidder. These private collectors, or publicani, paid the state a lump sum and then were legally entitled to collect more to make their profit. This created a system ripe for corruption and extortion, where tax farmers could bleed communities dry with little fear of reprisal. This practice fueled a deep resentment against Roman rule across the empire, a sense of injustice that often erupted into violent rebellion. Imagine the cry of fire echoing through the narrow streets of a Roman tenement district. In a city built of timber-framed apartment blocks, packed tightly together, fire was a constant and terrifying threat. To combat this, the Emperor Augustus created the vigiles. These men were a unique combination of a fire brigade and a night watch. Patrolling the streets with buckets and crude pumps, they were Rome's first responders. Their job was incredibly dangerous, often involving demolishing buildings to create fire breaks, to stop a blaze from consuming entire city blocks. For a sailor navigating the Mediterranean at night, the world was a dark and dangerous place. But as he approached the coast of Egypt, a powerful, steady beam of light would appear on the horizon: the legendary pharaohs of Alexandria. Standing over 300 feet tall, it was one of the wonders of the ancient world. Its light, reflected by a massive bronze mirror, was visible from up to 35 miles away. But the pharaohs was more than a navigational aid. It was a powerful statement of the wealth, knowledge, and power of the city it guarded, a beacon of civilization, shining out into the chaos of the sea. The city of Rome was a ravenous beast, and keeping it fed was a political necessity. The Annona, or grain dole, was a colossal logistical operation that imported vast quantities of grain from Egypt and North Africa. This was not charity. It was a system designed to prevent riots. Fleets of ships braved storms and pirates to deliver their precious cargo, which was then distributed for free or at a subsidized price to hundreds of thousands of citizens. A delayed shipment could mean starvation and chaos, making this the emperor's most critical, unspoken contract with his people. Long before grand temples of stone, the ancients worshipped in the deep, whispering quiet of sacred groves. These were natural sanctuaries, ancient stands of trees, believed to be imbued with a divine presence. To enter a grove was to step into a different realm, the air thick with the weight of ages. Here, in the dappled sunlight, mortals felt the raw, untamed power of the gods. No axe was permitted to touch the trees, and rituals performed within their shaded confines felt older and more potent than any city ceremony, a reminder of when the gods dwelled in the earth itself. Wine was far more than a beverage in the ancient world. It was the lifeblood of civilization. It was a dietary staple, often mixed with water to provide essential calories. It was the social lubricant that fueled the philosophical debates of the Greek symposium and the raucous revelry of a Roman feast. It was also a sacred liquid, poured in libations to honor the gods, and central to the ecstatic rituals of Dionysus. From the humblest tavern to the most sacred temple, wine was a constant, essential presence, a cornerstone of culture, religion, and commerce in a largely illiterate world. The scribe was the indispensable guardian of knowledge and power. He was not merely a copyist. He was the gatekeeper of civilization itself. The scribe recorded the pharaoh's decrees, tallied the grain harvests that fed the nation, and penned the legal contracts that bound society together. His rare skill with the written word gave him immense, quiet authority. While kings wielded the power of the sword, the scribe wielded the power of the permanent record, a force that could outlast armies and dynasties as the memory of the state. As you walked through an ancient city, you would have seen them on the periphery, figures deliberately ignored by respectable citizens. These were the social outcasts, people living on the absolute fringes of the community. They might be the disabled, whose conditions were often seen as a sign of divine disfavor, or those in unclean professions like tanning. These individuals were not just poor, they were often seen as ritually impure, a source of potential contamination. They lived a life of profound isolation, a constant, visible reminder of the brutal social and religious lines that defined their world. Before any major undertaking, a Roman general would not consult his maps first. He would consult the gods. A priest, or augur, would carefully observe the sky. Was the flight of birds on the left or the right? Or a haruspice would examine the liver of a sacrificed animal. Were its markings healthy or malformed? This was the high-stakes art of divination. The ancients believed the universe spoke in a language of omens, and the ability to interpret these signs was a source of immense power, a sacred practice where the fate of an empire could hang on the entrails of a sheep. The true heart of a Greek city was not its grandest temple, but the agora, the sprawling marketplace. This was far more than just a place to buy olives and pottery. It was the city's vibrant, chaotic, and ever-beating heart. Here, merchants shouted their prices, politicians tried to win over crowds with powerful speeches, and philosophers gathered disciples in quiet colonnades. Justice was dispensed, business was conducted, and the great issues of the day were debated. To understand the pulse of the city, one had only to stand in the agora and listen. When the formal mechanisms of power broke down, the ancient world often turned to a blunter political tool, the assassin's dagger. This was not random violence. It was a form of extra-legal political surgery. The senators who surrounded Julius Caesar with their hidden daggers saw themselves as patriots, performing a necessary, if bloody, act to save the Roman Republic from tyranny. In a world with few formal checks on power, assassination often became the ultimate recourse for the political opposition, a terrifyingly direct way to effect change. In the ancient world, a stranger arriving at your door was a sacred test. The concept of hospitality, or xenia, was a profound religious obligation. This was because the gods were known to wander the earth, disguised as humble mortals, and the traveler you took in might just be Zeus in disguise. To welcome a stranger was to honor the gods, and you were expected to offer them the best you had. To refuse them was a terrible sacrilege that could bring a divine curse down upon your entire household, making hospitality a weighty and sometimes fearful duty. Close your eyes and imagine the soundtrack of the ancient world. Music was woven into the very texture of daily existence. It was there in the solemn chanting of a priest leading a procession, the clear notes of a lyre accompanying a poet reciting epic verses at a symposium, and the sharp sound of the aloes driving the frantic energy of a Dionysian festival. From the lullabies sung to children to the martial tunes that sent soldiers into battle, music was an omnipresent force, used to celebrate, to mourn, to worship, and to stir the soul, giving rhythm and emotional depth to every aspect of life. The Roman family was not a democracy. It was an absolute monarchy, and the king was the paterfamilias. This was the oldest living male, and his legal authority was terrifyingly total. He held the power of life and death over everyone under his roof, including his adult sons and their families. He alone could own property. Anything his children acquired legally belonged to him. He arranged their marriages and could even sell them into slavery. While this ultimate power was rarely used, its existence shaped every facet of domestic life, where the will of one man was absolute law. In the ancient household, the rhythmic clatter of the loom was the constant sound of the women's quarters. But weaving was far more than a domestic chore. It was the primary measure of a woman's virtue and industry. A finely woven tunic was a walking advertisement for the skill and diligence of the household's women. For a noblewoman like Penelope in the Odyssey, her skill at the loom was synonymous with her faithfulness. For a common family, the cloth produced by its women was a vital economic asset. To be skilled in weaving was to embody the ideal of female excellence. Forget heaven and hell. For most in the ancient Greco-Roman world, the afterlife was not a place of judgment, but a destination of bleak, shadowy monotony. When you died, Your soul, a mere whisper of your living self, was ferried across a dark river to a gray, dusty kingdom. This was the underworld, a vast, joyless realm where the spirits of the dead fluttered about like bats, devoid of passion or purpose. The prospect was not one of fiery torment, but of an eternal, boring existence. It is no wonder the ancients clung so fiercely to the light and color of the living world. In the corridors of power, where open conflict was too risky, poison was the weapon of choice. It was the tool of the courtier seeking to eliminate a rival, or the queen desperate to secure her son's succession. Unlike the sword, poison was silent, subtle, and often difficult to trace. This constant, unseen threat bred a culture of extreme suspicion among the elite. Rulers employed food tasters, and the development of antidotes became a desperate obsession. The fear of a poisoned cup was a tangible part of daily life. In the palaces of the ancient world, in the open-air assemblies of Athens, and the bustling forum of Rome, the most powerful weapon was the human voice. In these societies, the art of rhetoric, of persuasive public speaking, was the ultimate key to power. A skilled orator could hold thousands spellbound, swaying a crowd to vote for war, acquit a defendant, or pass a crucial law. Great schools of rhetoric flourished, teaching aspiring leaders how to structure an argument and command a stage. A man's ability to speak with passion and persuasion could elevate him from obscurity to the heights of power. The retired Roman legionary was a complex and often volatile figure. After 20 years of brutal service, he was a hardened, disciplined man. The state's plan was for him to become a pillar of stability, settling in new territories to Romanize the population. But this veteran could also be a profoundly destabilizing force. His primary loyalty was often not to the state, but to the general he had fought and bled with for decades. Ambitious commanders could use this devotion to turn their legions into private armies, a double-edged sword that both built and broke the empire. In the ancient world, one of the most heinous crimes imaginable was sacrilege, an act committed against a god. This could be the theft of treasure from a temple, or the desecration of a sacred statue. This was not a victimless crime. It was an act that polluted the entire community and risked bringing the wrath of the offended god down upon everyone in the form of plague or famine. The punishment was therefore often swift, public, and brutal, usually death. It was a crime against the cosmic order, and the community had to purify itself of the offense in the most dramatic way possible. To study the ancient world is to realize that while the scenery has changed, the fundamental human dramas have not. We read of Athenian politicians wrangling over public spending, and see the echoes of our own budget debates. We learn of Roman anxieties over immigration and the decline of traditional values, and hear the familiar refrains of modern cultural tensions. The story of antiquity is not the story of a strange and alien people. It is the story of ourselves in a different costume, a reminder that the struggles that defined their world continue to shape our own. For much of early human history, law was a fluid concept, a mixture of custom and the arbitrary whim of a king. The decision to write the laws down, to carve them into stone for all to see, was a revolutionary step. From the Code of Hammurabi to the 12 Tables of Rome, codifying law was an attempt to make justice less personal and more predictable. It meant a citizen could, in theory, know their rights and the rules they were expected to follow. It was the first crucial step away from arbitrary rule and toward a government of laws, not of men. Though millennia separate us, we live today in a house built on ancient foundations. The languages we speak are rooted in Latin and Greek. The philosophical questions we ask about justice and reality were first explored by Plato and Aristotle. Our legal principles have their origins in Roman law, and our architecture still echoes the columns of the Parthenon. The epic struggles, political triumphs, and catastrophic failures of the ancient world are not just stories. They are the deep source code of Western civilization. To understand them is to understand our own origins.